next unicorn and in racing right now to build that. You bring a fresh perspective and a unique approach to building businesses. So for people who will not be familiar with what you do and what your brand does, would you like to introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. I mean, this will be the boringness part of the podcast, but I'm happy to do that. I am a long-term consumer products person. I've been in this industry now, I think this is my 36th or 37th year in the industry. So long time. And what I do is I work with entrepreneurial businesses that are in what I call the messy middle. You know, they're beyond startup. They're no longer, trying to prove product market fit. They've done that. They're in market. They're a real business, but they have yet to achieve durable scale. And so in that liminal space, there's a lot of latent enterprise value that's locked in a business. And my role, I work with either founders or CEOs as a coach directly with them, or as an advisor to their entire leadership team, or as a board member providing governance in general. And sometimes in some of our companies, I play all three roles. And the goal I have is really to help these entrepreneurs unlock that latent potential. And that allows their business to get to optionality, whether that's to sell to a large multinational, whether that's to IPO, whether that's just to build generational wealth as a very productive business that's good for those involved with it. That's the determinant of the owner, and my job is just to help them unlock it.
Very nice and very interesting. You mentioned that obviously, you offer one-to-one coaching to these founders, but I've also noticed that you focus a lot on community building, and you have actually a program where founders come together and can speak to each other and share ideas. How important do you think is just a community when you're building something, even when you're in the messy middle and you've started off?
Hugely important. I mean, I say this often. When you're an entrepreneur, oftentimes your only two companions are fear and doubt. And, and neither of them are exactly fun to go to the pub with and hang out. I mean, that's a constant. It can be a really isolating journey. And it's also where, blind spots deepen and energy depletion really build. So being a part of a community, having others who are walking the same walk, fighting the same fight, being able to share and build enough of a mutual trust that you can, remove the veneer of entrepreneurship and actually live through the vulnerabilities of entrepreneurship. It's critical to success. And the entrepreneurs that tend to outperform in my pattern recognition over the years are the ones that have built that around themselves, that they've built this, a vibrant ecosystem of support in which they don't just extract, but they give as much as they take.
And so when you were in a similar situation when you were starting off years ago, did
Uh,
you have that community with you?
I didn't at first, but I quickly recognized I needed it for myself. One is that by nature I'm a worrier, and so I didn't want to absorb all that worry. Secondly, I didn't want to impart my wife with that sole responsibility of being the holder of all my concern. That probably wasn't going to be good for either one of us. So yeah, I quickly started to build, and which was, I'm an introvert, and sometimes that's hard. That's hard to put yourself out there and begin to build that. But soon as I did, it made this journey abundantly easier, and it helped shape kind of what has become one of my core philosophies in business in general, and certainly in business building, and that is karmic boomerangs, as I call it, which is the principle that if you truly show up and give without expectation of reciprocity, that reciprocity follows, maybe completely somewhat from some other source, but it comes. That the industry will pay itself forward if you position yourself that way, and it also just feels a lot a much better way to do business in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, not just in business. I think if you apply that philosophy in your life also,
Yes.
it always comes back to you sometimes even more than you give. So that is a good one to keep with you always. Um, One thing that I before we actually jump into discussing the business and everything, you mentioned obviously you didn't want to pressurize your wife with all the stress that you were
Mhm.
getting from building a business from scratch up, and you've also mentioned before how supportive she was throughout your journey. For young entrepreneurs and for people who are building businesses, what is your one advice? Like when they're looking for a partner and they want that kind of life for them, where they're wanting to build something they're passionate about, what is your one advice if you could give them one thing that this is what you should look for in a partner before settling down with them?
Um, that's a really tough question. I mean, I don't know what you look for in a partner before that. I don't know how you pre-vet that, but I think what you do is you never lose sight of what really matters. You know, building a business is exciting. Building a business is an awesome journey and it's a fantastic opportunity. But businesses will come and go, and so what you need to remain steadfast in your commitment is that your partner first, your spouse, your family, your immediate family first, no matter what. And you can't lose sight of that. And you can't dismiss it because, in many ways, they're the easiest people to put on the back burner because they love you so much and they have so much faith and understanding in you that they'll allow themselves to be put there in support of you. But then you look
Yeah.
up one day and so much has transpired that it's really hard to take that back off the back burner. And I've seen so many relationships destroyed because of that, not out of malice, not out of malintent, or just out of the fact that they were deprioritized in the thought that that was the right thing to do at the moment. It is not. It never is. And you have to build boundaries from day one around that
Yeah.
and make that sacred. So, if I could figure out how to help you pre-vet that right partner, I'd probably be selling the algorithm for an online dating service. But that I can't do. But I can tell you that once you make that you know keep that as the center of the universe.
Yeah. And you mentioned making sure you have that boundary set from day one. Was that
Uh-huh.
something that you did, or did you realize on the journey that that's something you need to do?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think. I did. I mean, I never did sacrifice that priority at the time I started our business. Our kids are all now grown. We're grandparents and all of that, but they were. A couple of them were in university. One was in high school, so they were still very much, in need of us and our family togetherness. So I just would never downplay that, and I would never allow that to get sacrificed. But I didn't build formal boundaries as I've been doing this on my because I spent the first 25 years of my career in corporate and had to learn that same balance there. But now, as I've been doing this outside of that for so long, I have built pretty rock solid boundaries, and that is, things that I've learned to prioritize, knowing when to turn it off. I have a hard fast rule that at 9 p.m. at night, I don't care what I'm doing, all of my electronics go off. I don't do it. I make time every day for me. You have to learn to be selfish before you can be generous. That's kind of a internal mantra. So you've got to invest in yourself. All those things I've built into our life, and actually I work really hard with our entrepreneurs on that because as you're building a business, there are 5 dimensions, and some of them are very business oriented, but some of the other ones feel more, woo, soft skills, and one of them is energy management. It's really about building those rituals and routines that enshrine your energy, as well as your team members' energy. I mean, we live in this 24-hour connected world, and I'm in Northern California. You're in London. We're talking now. Probably 80% of my business is in some way multinational. So there are many, many, Zoom calls where somebody's having to suffer because, if we're talking to someone in the UK, here in the United States, and in Japan, we're distributing the pain. So
Yeah.
you have to build those boundaries, like not sending those emails at 10 o'clock at night just because you're trying to brain dump to your team, because if they're on the receiving end of that, they often feel compelled to respond at 10 o'clock and you're breaking their boundaries. So it just takes that mindset of building boundaries for yourself and for those that you work with to say, we're going to prioritize energy, because honestly, one of the best ways we can ensure the success of this business is to manifest the best versions of ourselves every day. And if we're doing that, we are inherently improving the chances of success. So it's a good strategy. It's not just a lifestyle thing that we tend to conflate sometimes and make it about balance or lifestyle. It's just good strategy. If you've got energized, non-depleted, fully engaged team around you because you're managing that well, you're just going to perform better as a company.
Interesting. I think all of the issues that obviously you've given us some great solutions, but the issues you've listed usually stem from people just being very, very passionate about what they're building. So they tend to blur all the lines around it. And obviously, then in that process, don't really care for boundaries of other people also.
Right.
In the start, at least in my humble opinion, I think passion is very, very important to start anything. Once you've started, as you deal with the messy middle, what are the three things you would say are very, very important to take it from the messy middle to an actual scaled business?
Well, let's talk about the leader specifically to that question, if I may. And
Yeah.
specifically, what I see is this natural matriculation of leaders who are able to navigate that messy middle and do it successfully. You just described the stage or the archetype of what I would call the doer, right? When you're early entrepreneurial stage, you are the doer. It's about, you're just going to grind it out. You're going to get everything done. And just about everything in your business has your fingerprint on it, and you just, out of sheer will, propel the business forward. And that is every startup, every entrepreneurial enterprise has that stage. It's a necessity, right? But eventually you need to matriculate past that. And then the next phase is to become an architect, to start building a scaffolding of discernment where you can decide where you should be spending your time and where you need to build team and systems around the business to absorb the scale that's coming and to begin to, make sure that everybody has defined roles and so forth. But then ultimately, to get to that durable scale, your role has to change yet again. That inner evolution has to go one step further, and that is you need to become a builder of capacity. And that's primarily your role. Your role is to build capacity in others, to build capacity in your business. And by that, I mean you build capacity through, having capital. You build capacity through robust supply chain, through, strong financials, but you really build capacity by empowering and supporting those that you've brought in and bringing that talent. And that becomes fundamentally what your job is as a leader. No longer the doer, no longer the architect. So if you can matriculate through those three things, the natural evolution of that means that you're no longer in the weeds. So you're likely not sending those email bombs at 11 at night because you're not as um, steeped in the day to day.
Hmm. Interesting. And so when you're moving from being the doer to becoming an actual leader, I think the most important part is actually building a great team that you can trust, because obviously letting go of that responsibility and giving control to someone else is often very important, for especially for people who started something of their own. So what should one be considering when they're hiring their first few employees or the first few people that will help the company go forward?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's hire for the things you don't do well first, right? Or don't enjoy doing. There's a great book written by Stephen Pressfield called the War of Art, and he talks about this natural resistance. We feel resistance for the things that we really don't want to do. So a good thing to do is look for the people who like the things you don't, so so that they can do well. Um, Hire people you like and like the people you hire. I think is also really important. But also understand too is that there's a difference between being the founder, being an entrepreneur, and being someone brought into an organization. You cannot expect the same of them as you do yourself, right? You just cannot.
Yeah.
So you have to be reasonable in those expectations. And then it's just, from there, it's just really building the culture and the team that you want. I think too many companies wait too long. They tell themselves, we're still small. There's only three of us. There's only four of us. There's only five of us. We don't need to worry yet about, defining culture and doing those kinds of things. And then they get to that stage where they feel they've reached that point and they can start doing it only to find out that the culture's already been defined and it's maybe not the culture they wanted, and it's very very hard to put that back in the bottle, right? And so being very prescriptive about what you want from day one, from your very first hires. What does it mean to work at this company? What do we value? What's our culture going to be, and how do we work together is critical.
Yeah, 100%. But I think you mentioned something which I at least have seen is very difficult to determine, especially when you're a first time entrepreneur, is determining the right time. Like, when is the right time to expand your team, or what are the signs that you should be looking for? Obviously, one is that your team's very overloaded. But in the beginning, it's almost glamorized that culture where, like, we're a startup, we're building a company, so everyone's working late hours, everyone has a lot on their plates. But when is it that you know that now is the time that I need to hire five more people, 10 more people?
I mean, that's a really difficult conversation and decision point, and it differs. Part of what differs is your access to capital. Part of what differs is your risk tolerance, right? Some people are needed to hire long ago, but their risk tolerance is too low that they couldn't do it or weren't ready for it. Others have a very high risk tolerance and don't mind being well ahead of their skis and hire very early. What I tend to recommend to entrepreneurs is take the um, the decision out of the decision. And what I mean by that is build in trigger points in the business. Like, I'm going to bring on a chief revenue officer once we get our first 10 million to trailing 12 revenue. That's when I'm going to look to do that, not before. And so that takes that decision out to get to that point, and you get to that point. Another really important thing to look at is a metric is, what am I generating revenue per person, right? And so, if you can look at it, or contribution dollars per person, even better, then you can make informed decisions. But it is more art than science, and it also means sometimes you find somebody who's just spectacular prematurely. What do you do then? So, we work in this world now where there's a lot more flexibility than there used to be 35 years ago, because there is this ability to really leverage fractional work to some degree, and that gives you more agility in terms of when you convert that to FTE. But eventually you're going to have to make those decisions, and I don't know that I've ever recognized like a tried and true absolute. It's just it's all of those variables. So
Yeah. Besides people and team, what are the other biggest challenges founders come to you with to solve?
well, a lot of them come to me with the same fundamental challenge. We've plateaued. I can't see him. We're stuck. What I've pattern recognized over these years is that the companies that successfully navigate this liminal space, right? Because it's very difficult, it's very different. That first scrappy, and again, I'll use arbitrary numbers, maybe it's 10, maybe it's $20 million that you build with that scrappy startup team that you're all eating takeaway and it's 2 in the morning and you're in your office. That may not be the team that gets you to $100 million, right? And so that space in between is where real complexity starts to build in a business. So often what I hear, what is being told is we're stuck, or I don't have the right people, or maybe my products aren't right. But in essence, it's more that in order to scale, in order to get to bridge that chasm to durable scale, what I've recognized is that there's five fundamental dimensions of that scale that need to be worked on concurrently. The first is some of the less interesting but most important, and that's just deep operational discipline, right? It's just real financial rigor, real focused on metrics and margins and data driven decision making and all of those kinds of things. The next we talked about earlier, which is energy management, making sure that you, the team, everyone involved in the project is you know getting the necessary restorative practices built into the business so that when they're at the business, it's the best version of themselves. The third is that function on team and systems. And that's, what I mean by that is not only hiring great talent, but building the systems around that great talent in terms of role definition, accountability, communication rhythms, technology to support them, et cetera, to fully enable them. The fourth dimension is focus on the fundamental. So a radical focus may be a better terminology, which is in every business we overcomplicate the business. We tend to open the aperture too wide, and entrepreneurs are known to be, squirrels chasing their next nut. What you need to do is narrow that aperture, keep the business in front of you, and identify fundamentally what is the most important thing that we need to be radically focused on to unlock the potential in the business. And then the fifth is that inner evolution of leadership that you and your other leaders in the business need to matriculate from doer to architect to capacity builder. If you're working in all five of those fundamentals, and you have a product and a market that you've already validated, you have a much better chance to scale. If any of those five dimensions are being ignored or not being developed, then your chances diminish significantly.
Yeah. Um, Within this, obviously, you have those five things, and you have tested and trialed your consumer product before, especially you work in food and beverage a lot. Currently, especially in the world we are in, there's something happening all the time. New technology is coming, competition is extreme. There is a possibility that once your product was a fit with the consumers, but now the situation has changed, something else has come up that is, say, better than the product that you were building. I mean, I'm thinking of an example. For example, kimchi is a very high competition space right now. A brand that was doing really well before could now be losing customers and losing consumer interest in general. How do you suggest that brands then evolve from that? Do they stop? Do they take a step back and see, like, is my product a fit, or do you think that once a fit has been established with the consumer, it's for life?
Definitely not the latter. I mean, I think I usually draw a circle saying, what you're trying to do is get to clarity, then you get to execution, then you get to legacy where the business is building yourself, and then you go right back to sense making and clarity again because, you know, behavior, consumer wants change, technology changes, fads change, functional wants change, and we work in food, beverage, personal care, supplements. It's all changing every day, and you just see it now when people right now we're in the midst of a protein craze. Next will probably be a fiber craze. Before that was a keto. So all of those things are changing. So you need to be listening. Empathy is a superpower. You need to constantly be listening and asking real strategic questions of your business. A question I get asked is, you know if we work with you, are you going to tell me what I need to do? Are you going to advise me on what we need? And my answer is no, absolutely not. And I won't do strategic plans with you either, which is back to your former life. None of that stuff to me makes sense because it makes the assumption that we have the answers. The real work is consistently asking of your business the right question. And a question is our product still relevant? Is the market still the same? What's changed in consumer behaviors? More importantly, if we're successful to 3 years from now, what are consumers doing 3 years from now that they're not doing today? So you're constantly challenging that. And the best companies, you know, whatever their quote unquote final product is when they exit or whatever to what their original product is, the most successful companies, it's almost hard to tell, you know, that they were the same companies because they've made that many adjustments in um, in that. So the risk, of course, is the opposite, which oftentimes is a real challenge, and that is that you pivot too quickly, you give up too fast, you don't hold fast. So that balance between being fierce and malleable is a really tough one, but you constantly need to be asking that question and watching market trends and being a student, being a student of your industry and of your consumer. For our industry and consumer, I tell our entrepreneurs all the time, if you're not spending at least a day a week walking around stores watching what consumers are doing, you're not serving your business.
Yeah.
So
I remember from my previous life, especially for CPGs, I think one way of connecting to the consumer was researchers. Also having a focus group, testing your product with them, getting their opinions, changing your product based on what they said. In today's world, it is so difficult to stay in touch with the consumer and then especially to be ahead of the curves because trends are changing constantly. For example, like this year is the year of wellness. As you said, protein is all the fad right now. This year is in retail is the year of wellness. Next year, we don't even know what's going to come up because everything changes so fast. How does one stay ahead of the curve? Obviously, we can always be listening, going to the grocery store, for example, to stay in touch with the consumers, keeping your eyes open for what's changing, what are people thinking about or have started talking about, so to predict what is going to blow up next. But how do you stay ahead of the curve?
you don't. I mean, I don't know that you can, but I think that the antidote to that is to don't chase fads. There's a
Mm-hmm.
big difference between fads and sustainable changes in consumer sentiment behavior. And we've all seen plenty of fads, and we've also seen what I would call disposable brands that chase them, right? And some of them do that with intentionality. They see a fad, they're going to ride the wave, and they know it's a disposable brand, and they'll ride it for as long as it is, and then they'll chase the next fad. But if you're trying to build a durable business, you can't chase fads. You cannot. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to stay uh, outside of that. But what you have to watch and try your best to be discerning on is what's the difference between a fad and a significant long-term consumer shift. And so, for example, I would say this, overconsumption or focus on protein is likely a fad. But what is not is the fact that consumers are taking far more agency in their own health, and they recognize that what they put in and on their bodies has a big, big role in terms of their longevity and health span and so forth. So that's a durable trend. And so, building a business around a shift like that makes sense versus building a business around a fad. So that's entrepreneurship in a nutshell, is being able to see things that others are missing,
Mm-hmm.
and see it differently and put a stake in the ground. And there'll be times you're right and there'll be times you're wrong. There'll be time you time the market and you wind up being too early and somebody else benefits from it, and there'll be times you're too late. But the best strategy is to try to see through the noise and find that, what are significant long-term, discernible shifts in consumer behavior, and follow those and avoid the fads.
Yeah. And in general, do you think in today's fast-paced world, it is more difficult to build a consumer brand based on physical products. Obviously, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was much easier to enter the market. Is it more difficult now, or do you think we have enough fair chances to enter the market?
I think it was hard 10 years ago. I think it was hard 20 years ago. I think it remains hard, you know, and historically, at least here in the US, the average 2 year fail rate has stayed the same for 20 plus years. It's about 85%. So it's hard. It's very, very hard to do this. I think most entrepreneurs in general are pathologically optimistic, and that's what makes them do it. And I also think I get asked this too a lot, and are entrepreneurs just like are they adrenaline junkies? Are they big risk takers? And the truth is, in my experience, the entrepreneur follows the same spectrum or continua that the majority of the populace does, in terms of, I see really risk adverse and really risk tolerant. But the difference between an entrepreneurial mind and and I say this in air quotes, a normal mind, is that while most of us see an opportunity in the market or unmet need, we are fearful of taking action. We're fearful of the giving up the sure thing to chase this. The entrepreneur sees the same opportunity, the same unmet need, and their fear is inaction. They're fearful that, what if I don't do this? What if somebody else does this? What if I miss this opportunity? And that's really the only difference. And so it's really hard. It's really hard to build a business. We romanticize it, but it's very difficult. But it's also an amazing, amazing journey. I mean, it's a really incredible, if you treat it as that, if you have a success, that's wonderful. But even if your product or your business doesn't succeed and you approach it the right way, you're going to learn so much about business, so much about consumer behavior, so much about yourself, that those skills are going to serve you well in whatever comes next.
Yeah, 100%. I think that optimism is necessary, that even if your product fails, you're taking away so much from that experience that it's going to help you in the future. If someone wants to start a business today, what would you advise them? What are other things that they should be focusing on, besides obviously getting the right consumer, getting all of the five things right? What is it that they need to be super clear about from day one?
I think the first thing is to build a financial foundation that makes sense. So you were able to build a business. We saw this in the early, I'm an old guy, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, we saw this with internet companies where they built a lot of traction but had no fundamental underlying business underneath it, and then when the bubble burst, they all collapsed. And we saw that a bit here in CPG post the pandemic. The reality is, if you have the opportunity to start today to build a business that has unit economics that will support the business. That you can build a pathway to profitability, because that is ultimately what's going to give you the most optionality. So the very first thing I would do is build something that is built foundationally on good unit economics.
Done. I think my last question, and I've been waiting to ask this question, is what do you have against building unicorns? Or
I
what
don't
is
have
what
any.
do you
That's a great question. I don't have anything built against unicorns. I really don't. But what I do know is that they're very few and far between. And because everybody thinks that that's the only way to do it, a lot of people miss out on the opportunity to build a really good business because they're chasing the wrong thing. So, for example, there's, the analogy I sometimes will use is that you don't want to put, there's rocket ships. There's no question there are rocket ships. But most of the businesses being built are Toyotas. They can be really reliable things that can get you where you want to go. But you don't want to put rocket fuel in a Toyota because it's just going to blow up. And that's what I see so often with these companies, that they could be really good businesses, but they jump into VCs because that's what they think they need to do. And VCs follow the power law. That's not an indictment on them. In fact, I work with many of them, but that's what their model is. So their model is that one or two of their investments are going to return an outsized return in a magnitude of order that makes the whole fund. So they're okay with others that fall down. But if you're the entrepreneur and the one losing out, it's your business. So what I encourage is ask yourself a question: am I really a unicorn? Is this what, do I have something that the world absolutely needs that nobody else is doing, that can be truly ubiquitous, that can get there? If so, great, go for it. Go for it. Or if you have a really high risk tolerance and that's what you want, and you're completely okay with crashing and burning and getting up and dusting yourself off and doing it again, go for it. But there is another path, and that's the path of building, a tardigrade, which, was something that I was just looking for an antithetical mascot to the unicorn to illustrate in an article, and I stumbled across this, microscopic creature that can live without food and water for 30 years and, live in any ecosystem. And that's what I want entrepreneurs to build. I want them to build inherently resilient, agile, capital efficient businesses, because if they do that, then what they may find out down the road, a year from now, 5 years from now, you know what? We do have a rocket ship. Let's go. That's fine. But also, if not, they find themselves building a business that can create, life-changing wealth for themselves and for, the early investors, as well as do good. I'm a big believer that to this day, still commercial companies, businesses are our best change agents. Entrepreneurs are our best change agents. So, most entrepreneurs want to do right by people, planet, etc. So let's let them do that without giving them only one choice, which is to be a rocket.
Yeah, interesting. And I know I said last question, but one more question I want to pick up your brain on is, I know you can't predict, and I know this is, everything can be a business, but if I were starting a business right now and you said these are the few industries you should be looking into, obviously wellness being one where people are taking more care of themselves, what other industries are really going to blow up in the future, or you think will blow up?
I mean, I'm not a futurist for sure. I mean, what I would say is that, I've been in consumer now for, like I said, over 35 years, and in particular food, beverage, personal care, supplements. And the reality is that's an industry that weathers all storms. People continue to eat, people continue to take care of their bodies and take care of themselves. And so I love this space. And I think, within this space, I think it comes back to, I think a major shift is in the infinite agency of the consumer now, who is now, with the advent of wearables, with everything that's going on, people are now looking at what they put in and on their bodies more prescriptively. They want more than just satiety. They want more than just look. They want something that's contributing to longevity or health span or so forth. So I think if you're in any of that, you're likely to be there. I also love finding sleepy categories that have not been disrupted in a long time. I mean, in our industry, everybody runs to snacks or bars or beverage, but there's whole parts of the industry that are far less replete with new entries and are a little bit sleepier, that are ripe for disruption. So I would look for a disruption opportunity in a sleepy category.
Nice. I'm taking a lot from this conversation. I think first and foremost being be selfish before you can be selfless. But thank you so much for taking the time out. It was lovely speaking with you, and yeah, have a great day.
Thank you. My pleasure. Great questions. I enjoyed the conversation.